There are strange things in this world, things that no one has seen, but they're there all the same, quietly existing in their own sphere. Sometimes, every once in a while, we catch a glimpse of those strange things, those phantoms of the deep, and they challenge our notion of reality. What is possible? What do we really know? And then also, what do we want to be real? Today's story forces us to grapple with our sense of reality. Today's story is about the Eltanin antenna. That's right, the Eltanin antenna. Sometimes fate gives us an interesting alliteration as well. These are my favorite. It's kind of like fate is just having a bit of fun with us. Make sure to like and subscribe. Join right now for only 99 cents for sweet loyalty badges, emojis, and comment priority. And support me on Patreon for more stories like this every Monday and other cool perks. And also shout outs to our latest ghost patron, Sharma. Thank you for joining the Moonlit Patreon. Without further ado, enjoy the story and the mystery of the strange Eltanin antenna. After the wake of World War II, the United States created the National Science Foundation in 1950. 12 years later, in 1962, it outfitted a retired Navy vessel with science equipment, which then became the USNS Eltanin. That's the United States National Science Vessel, Eltanin. The Eltanin was the first dedicated Antarctic oceanographic research vessel, or in other words, it was a floating laboratory, the first of its kind, decked out with all sorts of the latest gizmos and doodads. As a science vessel, it made its maiden voyage shortly thereafter in July of the same year, and over the course of 10 years, it sailed over the Antarctic Ocean, performing all sorts of experiments, not least of which was photographing the ocean floor. It surveyed approximately 80% of the Southern Ocean and also discovered significant evidence to support the theory of continental drift by observing it with precision measuring and magnetically attuned devices. And then on August 29th, 1964, on its 15th voyage about 1,000 miles off the coast of Cape Horn with a cable-mounted camera at the depth of approximately 3,904 meters or 13,500 feet, it snapped a photo of whatever this is. Now, before I get into this further, just take a moment and do a quick gut check. Look at this thing and just what do you think it is? This is the actual photo, and this is an artist's rendition of what it looks like in greater detail. So a few months after the photo was taken, on December 4th, the Eltanin, the USNS Eltanin docked at Auckland, New Zealand to analyze all their new data, and someone aboard apparently thought it was an interesting enough photo to show the local press because the very next day, on the 5th, the New Zealand Herald ran an article titled "Puzzle Picture from Seabed." It said, "The American research ship Eltanin sailed into Auckland with a mysterious photo taken at 2,250 fathoms, 1,000 miles west of Cape Horn. The photograph, which to the layman looks something like a complex radio aerial jutting out of the mud bottom, was taken on August 29th by a submarine camera." The senior marine biologist aboard the USNS Eltanin, Dr. Thomas Hopkins, weighed in on the matter. He felt like the object couldn't be a plant because it was too deep down for there to be enough light for photosynthesis. And as you and I know, all plants utilize the process of photosynthesis. That is the conversion of sunlight into energy. So his reasoning is pretty sound, right? If that is a universal characteristic of a plant, then it can't be a plant because sunlight doesn't penetrate that deeply into the water. So if it's not a plant, then what is it? A few years would go by and author Brad Steger, Yes, the Brad Steger who wrote and edited the Project Blue book, among many other fantastic works of fiction, saw the photo and he immediately knew what it was. He wrote a piece for Saga magazine stating that the Eltanin photographed an astonishing piece of machinery, very much like a cross between a TV antenna and a telemetry antenna. Dr. Hopkins would also address this very possibility. He said, "I wouldn't like to say the thing is man-made because this brings up the problem of how one would get it there. But it's fairly symmetrical, and the offshoots are all 90 degrees apart. How indeed would someone get an antenna nearly 14,000 feet below the surface of the Antarctic Ocean? Never mind why, because at the time there were no manned vehicles, well, at least we knew of, that could descend to such depths. Perhaps someone just dropped the antenna into place, right? Regardless, either way, the photo didn't make, at the time, huge national or worldwide headlines, but those who did see the object were quick to pass judgment. Theories ranged from it was a piece of equipment that had fallen off of a ship to it was a Russian spy antenna. But this was also around the same time that renewed interest and fervor in the 1947 Roswell incident was spawning fears all over again of alien invasions. So naturally, this object in the public eye, because of how strange it was and how out of place it was, morphed into an elaborate alien antenna array. And for decades, this has been proof of alien technology, never mind why it's on the bottom of the ocean, or what aliens would actually be doing with it in the first place. It also should be noted that despite your initial impressions of this object is only about 2 feet high from the surface of the ocean floor. So to me, it is actually a lot smaller than I initially thought it was. But that fact is overlooked by those eager to assume alien tech, especially those wrapped up in the 70s alien invasion fever pitch. But it's no longer the 60s or 70s or 80s or 90s. Now it's 2022. Surely we have a better understanding of what this thing is, right? Well, yeah, we do. Surprisingly, it actually didn't take 60 years for information surrounding its true identity to come to light. In fact, this very object was described nearly a century before this photo was ever even taken in the first place. You see, when researcher Tom DeMary asked A.F. Amos, a marine biologist who had served aboard the Eltanin when the photograph was taken, he referred DeMary to a book called The Face of the Deep. In that book, written by Bruce Heezen and Charles Hollister, there is a drawing of Cladorhiza concrescens. This drawing was from a previous work written in, get this, 1888 by Alexander Agassiz, who first saw this thing and described it after it had been plucked up from the ocean floor by a fishing vessel. That work was called 3 Cruises of the Blake. And remember, it was written in 1888. In it, Agassiz describes in detail what this thing is, and he says it had a long stem ending with ramifying roots sunk deeply into the mud. The stem has nodes with 4 to 6 club-like appendages. They evidently cover, like bushes, extensive tracts of the bottom. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking. Roots? Sinking deep into the mud of the ocean floor? We've already established that it can't be a plant. It's too deep down, you say, vigorously and with passion, and I agree with you completely. It's not a plant. Brace yourselves. It is a carnivorous sea sponge. In fact, it is an animal. And that is what Cladorhiza concrescens is. A carnivorous sea sponge. It's an animal that looks much like a plant. This is a weird, strange world we live in, and there are no clear lines. We try to split things up into nice little compartments, but there's always some type of thing that rebels against our little classifications and tries to, throw monkey wrenches and everything. But that is the world that we live in. It's a very strange place, and oftentimes it's hard to define, but the way we have defined it, a sponge, it doesn't utilize photosynthesis. It has some attributes of plants, like it grows roots. It doesn't have a central nervous system, but in other ways, it is actually an animal. Very strange. And get this, the most interesting thing is that Heezen and Hollister actually described this creature as a particularly dramatic sponge, which somewhat resembles a microwave antenna. So it appears that the actual mystery isn't so much to do with aliens, but what on earth a lone carnivorous sponge is doing all by its lonesome out in the middle of the Antarctic, especially when Agassiz claimed that these things grew like bushes on the ocean floor. And indeed, that is the mystery. That is one of the reasons this looks so strange to us. Perhaps if we saw it in a group of hundreds or thousands all next to it, it wouldn't have looked so bizarre. But alas, it is by itself, and it just goes to show how unbelievably strange the ocean, the depths of the ocean, is. It would appear that the ocean is stranger than we could imagine. And although it is strange, it is certain that this is actually what this photo is of. It is a living organism and has been described and observed for a century, multiple times. Okay, but you say you're just not convinced, right? It's too precise to be an animal. Well, here are some modern photos of these kinds of sponges. And keep in mind, this image, it's a very low resolution image. If it was higher definition, we might see that it isn't so mechanically precise at all. We might even catch a glimpse of little imperfections, biological nuances, and other things like that. But because it barely pops out, it looks like a machine. In fact, the base of the object, if you inspect it closely, it already exhibits a non-machine-like uniformity. It is biological. It's not symmetrical at the root. In fact, it looks like the start of a trunk, of like a bush or a tree. Its base isn't what you'd expect a genuine manufactured metal antenna to look like. It's a little off. And this drawing, keep in mind, is of a dead sponge. Alive and in the water, those nodules jut out at 90 degrees in straight lines. We just have ourselves here a particularly rebellious, symmetrical Cladorhizon concrescens, carnivorous sea sponge. Wow, that was a mouthful. I didn't intend for that to be that way in that sentence. And its mechanical-like appearance is exaggerated due to the low resolution imaging contrasted with the C4. But I know there's going to be naysayers. And to those who say antenna, who double down on aliens, I understand. I get it. I believe in aliens. There may be aliens here on Earth. I don't really know, but I'm not opposed to the idea. What I want to convey is that it doesn't really matter what I say. All I can ask is that you see that there is a documented animal that exhibits traits for all intents and purposes identical to what we see in this image. And I just want to present you with this question to any watching this. Objectively speaking, what is more likely, that this is a known sea sponge or an alien antenna? It's an honest question. It's not to exclude alien technology, but we have to be honest with ourselves. And if I'm being honest with myself, yes, it looks like an antenna, but with the knowledge that I have gained while researching this, and with the knowledge I hope I have imparted to you, I am 100% certain that this is a biological living entity, not alien technology. What happened with the Eltanin antenna in the 60s and 70s, it's not isolated to those decades. Information just spreads quicker and in different ways today. In fact, the same thing happens all the time. You need not look any further for a prime example than to our dear Tom DeLonge and those pesky Navy UFOs. I have a video breaking down one of those UFOs in depth right here. Feel free to check that out right here or right here. I still don't know which side of the screen it's on, but feel free to check that out right now. And also support me on Patreon to get your name in the credits right here next to these other amazing people who support this channel, me, and my endeavors to talk about strange things, to solve mysteries, and to just kind of do what I want to do. I love sharing these stories with you guys, and I'm so happy that you guys want to hear my stories. Thank you guys. That's today's story. It's a shorter one, but just remember, keep an eye out and stay paranormal.